Hello everyone and welcome. Make a cup of your favorite drink and get comfortable because this is a wonderful time for news stories from YellowCat. Send your own favorite stories in the comments below and maybe they'll be in our new video. Today we have new amazing stories, so subscribe to the channel if you're not subscribed yet. Let's get started. Which legal way is best to annoy your neighbors? Our neighbors, Bob and Stella, were a major pain in the A until recently. They would constantly be upset about things like parking, what people kept on their driveways, or the grass in their neighbors' yards being too long. They were essentially an HOA, but we didn't live in a neighborhood where one existed. However, instead of sharing their problems with you, they would only act as spies. They called the parking authority on us multiple times because our car hadn't moved in 48 hours. We weren't occupying any space on the street, and there was plenty of parking available. We had a storage container on our driveway for longer than allowed by city bylaws, so they had called the city office. Our dog was crying for 5 minutes to come inside, but we were working downstairs and didn't hear him. It was also a gorgeous day outside, so our dog was fine. Nevertheless, they called the SPCA on us. My father noticed Bob and Stella's habits over time. One thing he observed was Bob's insistence on being the first person on the street to complete a task. He was the first to plant his garden, trim the hedges surrounding his house, and cut his grass in the spring. Bob had to do it first, whatever it was. Dad then figured out what he could easily take advantage of to annoy Bob, and the best part was that he could do it every Tuesday morning without fail. You see, after the garbage man had left, one of the things Bob had to do first was bring in his garbage can. Bob rushed out the door to retrieve his trash can after they had dropped it back on the ground. The garbage man's habit of arriving on our side of the street via the back alley, crossing it to the alley by Bob's house, and then gathering up Bob's trash was the only issue. For my dad, it turned into a Tuesday ritual. He used to get up early, brew himself some coffee, settle into his favorite patio chair in front of the house, and read the newspaper until the garbage collectors arrived to pick it up. He would wave to them politely, get up from his chair, go get the trash can, and return it to our driveway as soon as they dropped it back on the ground. Returning to his patio chair, he watched in horror as Bob, the second person on the street to grab his garbage can, stormed out with a sour expression on his face. There were times when Dad would even wave hello to Bob. Beehives. Totally lawful in my area. I've owned them for more than a decade. Most of my neighbors adore them, and they don't cause any trouble at all, good for the gardens and free honey. It appears that the neighbor who moved in 5 years ago is having issues with them. She has made too many calls to the police and council, and each time they tell her the same thing. It's legal, they're not bothering anyone, and the bees were there first. She attempted to take matters into her own hands by using a can of fly spray to jump the fence in the middle of the night while intoxicated or high. She unintentionally leaped into my neighbor's yard since it was very dark. Their very large guard dogs bailed her up. She pretty much destroyed their gardens, boat, shed, and smashed the windows in their car trying to get away from them. When the police arrived, she drunkenly admitted that she had tried to poison my bees, but got the wrong yard. She tried to sue me. If I wasn't trying to poison her bees, none of this would have happened. Police and attorneys made fun of her. Cop threw the book at her, and my neighbors are suing her for all the damage, plus restraining order. She is now beyond broke. The bees are still there. When I hand out free honey around the neighborhood every few months, I always make sure she's around watching me, and then intentionally don't give her any. Other neighbors tell me they regularly mention my bees around her just to see her lose her ass. Even now, this makes me laugh, but it's clear that most people can't relate to it. My dad worked in a very wealthy town, a New York City burb, and was friends with Hal, a businessman from the area. Hal came to this country as an immigrant and only went to school through the 8th grade. He then started his own construction company and became a multimillionaire. He had a lot of money in a town where everyone has a lot of money. Still, he was rich enough that he didn't care what other people thought of him. In the 1960s, when this suburb was more like a farm town than a suburb, he put a lot of money into land. He bought some land, and one of the pieces of land was already zoned as a working farm. He didn't need the money on the land, so he kept it, tore down the few buildings that were still there, and didn't do anything to improve it. It stayed empty the whole time. Eventually, the land around the land was built on, but the lucky people who bought homes on that land still had about 20 acres of open space. Hal didn't mind if they went to that spot to walk their dogs or look around. Anything that made sense was okay for them to do with it. Hal liked it because it had farm zoning that had been in place for a long time, and he hadn't made any changes to it or divided it up, which would have required an update to the zoning. This meant that he only had to pay about $300 a year in property taxes, which was nothing. Based on how much it was worth, his taxes would have been easily $10,000 to $12,000 a year if it wasn't zoned as a farm. Things were going well until Penny moved in. Penny had too much time and money because she was married to a rich man. She decided on her own to find out what was going on with the 20 acres of empty land. This was before the internet, so it took some work to do this. Hal turned out to be the owner, and she learned that he only paid $300 a year in taxes. Penny thought this was totally unfair and that Hal was getting special treatment. The land was not at all a farm, and he should be taxed based on how much it was worth, not because it was zoned as a farm. So she got a lawyer and chose to fight to change the zoning. Hal was never afraid to fight, and Penny had no idea who she was up against because she was new to the area. There was no doubt that David and Goliath were in a fight, but Hal chose to make fun of it and teach Penny a lesson. At the end, they have to go before the planning and zoning team. Hal has owned the property for a long time and has never used it as a farm. The Planning and Zoning Committee sees this as an opportunity to bring in more tax money and decides that Hal should pay the full taxes on the property instead of the adjusted taxes because the zoning should be changed. Hal thinks this is silly and asks if he can keep the farm zoning if he really does use the land as a farm. Planning and Zoning agrees with this because they had to. Hal cuts down the trees on the part of the land that is closest to Penny's house. He builds a barn, some stables, some areas with fences around them. Since it's a farm, he turns the part close to Penny's house into an alpaca farm and adds some horses and chickens for good measure. Then, he had to hire people to take care of the animals, which meant that those people were on and off the property all day, every day. Also, don't forget the sweet smell of farm animals and the sweet sound of roosters crowing early in the morning. He still only had to pay $300 a year in taxes because it was a farm. Since the land was zoned for a farm, he was entirely within his rights to run a farm there. He took care of the farm for 5 years before Penny moved, probably because she was running out of money. Then, he finally took it apart and let the property return to how it was before, which made the neighbors happy. No one again said the land wasn't zoned correctly. Have you ever been involved in/watched the overthrow of a horrible HOA board? Tell your story. I was very lucky. A crazy person moved in not long after we did. He had just been fired as president of the board and had to sell his house because he was not allowed to come back to the US. He was a UK citizen on a holiday visa because he had beaten up a resident. Along with about 12 full-time renters, we have 200 single-family homes on our site. The rest rent or do what snowbirds do. I know the person who was hurt. He lived next door to me. He was going to paint his fence blue to match the inside trim. The sole way you could see it? Get into his land. I only wish there was a stand your ground scene here, but since they were both from the UK, there were no guns. There were a lot of fights that my husband had to break up. The management company we had way too many properties, so they didn't do anything for years. For example, they didn't fix the broken waterfall in the pond, and algae killed the fish. Then, the management company's owner passed away. We were responsible for years, but there wasn't enough of us to make a quorum, so we almost broke up. The county would have taken over. That would have made me happy because someone got elected as caretaker and was giving out tickets and fines. There was no sign of the money. There was a mess in the books. Then one guy took charge and called everyone to make sure there was a quorum. We got rid of the old board and caretaker and put in a new one. I was going to run for treasurer, but a retired CPA stepped up instead. We now have a full-time HOA with a board. We fixed up our pond and put fish in it so we can fish, catch, and eat them. We also have new signs with Christmas lights on them for the season. There's a big waterfall near our front door that works. Trash cans are free, but if you leave them out, the city will find out. Also, if you park in the middle of the road, they will call the police. There are no fines, rehomed a gator in our pond after the Disney incident, everyone was scared. All pretty basic stuff. Immediate approval of new colors on repainting your home, 1 of 50 colors you can choose from, none of this 14 colors expensive Laura Ashley-esque, and doors and roofs can be any color you like, no approval needed. I wouldn't get another HOA, but I'm lucky the way this one turned out. Blacktop driveways were a feature of our homeowners association, and one of the residents had a vehicle that had a minor oil leak. He was initially instructed by the HOA to maintain the cleanliness of the driveway, which he accomplished by using cat litter and a broom. They proceeded to inform him that the blacktop was unattractive and that they intended to take corrective action in response to this. However, the homeowners association came to the conclusion that their corrective action would be to send out a crew with a skid loader, dig up the entire driveway, and then replace it. They would also charge him $5,000 for damaging common elements. The driveway was not any more unsightly than any other driveway. His neighbor was a lawyer, and he took the case on without compensation, and he managed to prevail in it. The board was also threatened with a harassment suit, and over the course of the subsequent couple of elections, we were able to elect an entirely new board. As quickly as I could, I sold my home and relocated and the HOA land. We sold our house and moved to get away from our HOA. At first, it seemed harmless. Pay a monthly fee to have your lawn mowed, paint your house the same color as everyone else's, and everyone just kept to themselves. The neighborhood looked fine, but some of the houses needed major repairs. The people who lived there, besides my husband and me, were all over 60 and couldn't really do things themselves, but we put a lot of time and money into making our place look nice. Then our metal gate broke. We looked around the neighborhood and thought about the styles of the other front fences and gates. My husband, who owns a cabinet shop and works as a contractor, made a beautiful wooden gate with metal inlays. The metal matched other metal in the neighborhood, and the wood matched our front fence and our neighbor's fence. Other fences were different colors, and some people didn't have gates or had gates of different colors, but we stuck to what was common in our neighborhood. People in the neighborhood hadn't asked the HOA board for permission to make changes since last year, so no one had been asking for it. We got a letter all of a sudden telling us that we had 30 days to take down the fence and build a new one, or we would be fined and taken to court. Not legal without an appeals process, which is what I said in response. Then we were told that the fence had to be painted the same color as the house. Other fences in the neighborhood aren't painted, so I complained that this was an unfair application of unwritten rules since the covenants didn't say anything about fence paint. Someone was always complaining about something. One of them even said that we hadn't been allowed to fix our leaky roof, even though we had replaced the shingles with the same ones, while the board president had shingles that didn't match the rest of the neighborhood. Finally, I did my homework and some digging in state legal code and records and discovered that our HOA had not filed its required paperwork with the state or county in over 15 years and, therefore, was not actually a homeowners association under state law and said if I didn't stop getting harassing anonymous letters in the mail, notes on the fence, and letters threatening to take us to court when I knew that the HOA didn't have the funds to do so thanks to a past president, that I would be reporting them to the Secretary of State and suing for 3 years of dues that they were not legally entitled to collect. However, I guess that wasn't a strong case for them. That's why I sued. It was great to see the looks on their faces when the verdict came out. There was a huge amount of damage done to the HOA. Everyone on the board had to pay back the whole amount, plus money to make up for threats and harassment. It was crazy how much it was. The neighborhood doesn't have an HOA anymore. Moral of the story, if your HOA is giving you S, do your homework and read up on state laws regarding HOAs. Sometimes these power-hungry bees don't file their paperwork and only think they have power. Guys, thank you for all the support and likes. Subscribe to the channel if you're not subscribed yet. See you next time.